All right, and here we are with part two of the long-term causes of the Chinese Civil War. And so I'm not going to publish the learning outcomes again or learning objectives again because you got them in the previous one. And so keep in mind as we are looking through this information that I am hoping that you understand how these factors could have contributed to the outbreak of war in 1927, and then also to consider how these long-term factors overlap with what is happening internationally. One of the biggest problems faced by China and one of the underlying causes of the civil unrest is that of poverty. Reasons for poverty amongst the population are manifold, and one of the biggest one is that China has very limited arable land. So only about 10% of the land of China is arable that is suitable for growing crops for agriculture. The rest of it is mountainous, it is desert, and or it might have poor soil or prone to flooding, etc. And the other thing, of course, is, or maybe not of course, that contributes to this. You have limited arable land, you have a massive population and a growing population. One of the things that exacerbates this is that it suffers from natural disaster. And so that natural disaster could be things like the rains don't come on time, and especially in the southern portion of the country, they grow quite a lot of rice, which needs huge amounts of rainfall. On the other hand, you can have too much rainfall. China drains a number of large rivers that begin in the Himalayas. You can have rapid snowmelt, too much rainfall. You have rapidly swelling rivers, flood, and which destroys the fields and kills people. And then on top of that, you have these poor agricultural yields. So you have a rapidly growing population, which pretty much needs to consume all of the resources that are produced. And on years that you have poor agricultural yields, you are going to have people who are starving. So China was prone also to famine as a result of these natural disasters. So that is just natural stuff that in essence, the government doesn't really have much control over. Another thing that is happening, and this is a socially based reason for the poverty, 70% of the land is owned by 10% of the population. The vast majority of people in China are subsistence farmers. That is, that they are growing enough food essentially only to feed themselves and their family. And the land that they're working on is not their own. And so the rents that they have to pay often comes in the form of food and agricultural yields, which means that the vast majority of the population is at the mercy of the landowners. If they need more money, if taxes are increased, so on and so forth. And so when you combine the fact that they don't own their land with the vulnerability to natural disasters, you have a population that is constantly suffering from lack of food. We have really, really high rents from the landowners, and those rents can be 50 to 80% of the crops produced. Again, taking food out of the mouths of those working. And this is going to be one of the big things, one of the major ideas that the Communist Party is going to capitalize on to help gain supporters. Another thing, social and economic, is China hadn't industrialized. So this meant, as I said previously, the vast majority of the population were subsistence farmers. But this small urban population and little industry means that there's no industry, there are no places to absorb this rapidly growing population. So people, as they're starving in the countryside, have few options. They can't go to the cities to look for work because there aren't many cities. There's no industry that they can go into, which is what happened in the European countries when the population in the countryside became too much. A lot of those people moved to the cities and they were able to be absorbed. So people are essentially between a rock and a hard place. Now, one of the biggies, of course, that is going to impact the ability of the Qing dynasty to maintain control and legitimacy and help lead to their overthrow is this Western imperialism. And this idea of Western imperialism is going to be very important to the ideology developed by Mao. As you can see here from this cartoon, we've got the major European powers and Japan sitting around the table, knives ready, carving up some China for themselves. All right. Historically, China had been a major power in Asia, and she herself had had a lot of vassal states like in Vietnam and Korea, etc. But as the Industrial Revolution takes shape in Europe and the Americas, China did not industrialize, and instead what they chose to do was enter a state of isolationism. And so this isolationism is different than the isolationism employed by Britain and the US, in that Britain and the US prefer to be politically isolated, that is, not get involved into the political affairs of various countries, but remain in communication in terms of like trade and sharing of ideas. And what this meant is that the other countries are going to industrialize, and China is going to be unable to meet them equally, and therefore unable to prevent European powers from dominating her. And so in 1839 through 1842, there was the Opium Wars. And the Opium Wars, at this point in time, Britain, yay Britain, was the world's largest drug dealer. Essentially, China was saying, hey, opium is bad news for people. We do not want you to sell opium in our country. And Britain was like, look, you let me sell opium, I'm going to get out my guns. And China was like, no opium. And Britain was like, boom. Essentially, trust me, I was there. That's what happened. And so because China lost the Opium Wars, she had to make these concessions. She had to start signing these treaties. And this was the beginning of these unequal treaties with the West, in which the West benefited and China was hurt. And so now she's opening up to the West for trade, but it is always unequal in her favor. And so trade concessions were eventually made with Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan. And one of the things about Japan is in the 1860s, Japan started the Meiji Restoration. That is the restoration of the chrysanthemum throne to political control of the country. And one of the reasons why Japan starts this Meiji Restoration is because they saw what was happening to China by the time we get to the 1860s, and they did not want the same thing to happen to them. And so that's one of the movements behind Japan's rapid industrialization at the end of the 19th century, and then expansion in the 20th century. And so essentially these trade concessions eventually meant that the import and export business within China was not under government control. So the goods that were exported and the goods that were imported, the Chinese government couldn't pass tariffs on them. The Chinese government couldn't charge extra taxes and stuff like this to make money off of the things that were produced. So essentially, it was the loss of the Opium War and the resulting trade concessions completely violated or led to the loss of autonomy over her economy and sovereignty. And this, of course, meant that China is going to remain poor. We have the Christian missionaries, as discussed previously. With this opening, the forced opening of China is the importation of these foreign ideas. And of course, the conversion of people to Christianity. These unequal treaties, as previously stated, no control. And then the other thing that happened in addition to these treaties is the granting of territory to these foreign powers. So France moves into Indochina, which is currently the area that we know as Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Russia claims Manchuria. China fights the first Indochina War with Yeah, brain fart like I did in class. Indo-Japanese War. Yay! Oh no, that's wrong too. My word. Sino-Japanese War. With Japan, and loses Korea and Taiwan. And as you can see, here's some images. On the left are the Boxers who were fighting during the Boxer Rebellion. You can see the weapons that they are with, more traditional weapons, things like this. And then on the right, you have the image of the various countries involved in quelling the Boxer Rebellion in order to basically keep control over their trade concessions and to make sure that they're getting the goods out of China that they want. And these are Britain, US, Australia, British India, Germany, France, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and Japan. On the right, again, we have another image of the Empress, the Dowager Empress Cixi. And one of the things that happens in response to this imperialism is it's called the 100 Days in 1898. And this was an attempt at modernizing China. First, and this was supposed to be sort of comprehensive. And as you can see, it's called the 100 Days because it lasted 100 days. And the whole point was kind of bringing China into the current century to be able to meet these imperialist powers on more equal foot and sort of reclaim some of her sovereignty, or at least not lose any more ground. And it was at modernizing the military, getting new equipment, getting different training, understanding like basically the way that fighting was happening in this current time period. The educational system, presenting new topics, new information, understanding the ideas of Europe, and completely changing the way the educational system worked in terms of the bureaucracy and mandarins, improving the bureaucracy, as we said, modernizing it, making it work in a more efficient and effective way in terms of governing the country and administering the country to meet the needs of the government. Having the government be, again, more streamlined, have it be less based on, say, nepotism and connections within society, developing the transport. And one of the really important things about transport is that it provides communication between different parts of the country. China is massive. It is a very, very large country. And one of the reasons why you can have regionalism develop is because the government is not able to extend its reach out into the more frontier areas. By improving transport, building more roads, building canals, building especially railroads, so that the movement of goods, the movement of troops could be faster. One of the things about famine is that sometimes famine happens not because not enough food is grown, but because there is no way to get food from areas of overproduction to areas of underproduction that are experiencing the famine. So the idea is by improving transport, then some of the problems that they were having that was causing social unrest would be addressed. And then finally, and importantly, developing industry, developing their own industry to produce their own goods so they wouldn't be reliant on goods sold at whatever cost the Europeans and Japan decided to sell them. Develop their own industry would be doing things like, having to being able to develop their own railroads and so on and so forth. And all of these, keep these in mind, because these are reforms that Mao is going to definitely implement, and for these various reasons. Now, this was stopped by the Dowager Empress Cixi. And there are two, I guess, two I'm going to present to you, interpretations as to why she would have stopped it. And so the first one, the traditional one, says that she stopped this because it was going to be heavily undermining her power. She stopped it because she was afraid of new ideas. She was afraid of the change. And, you know, she's pretty old by the time we get to this point. And she's been in power for a very long time. And she saw this as upsetting the traditional hierarchy of society and basically undermining her power. And essentially a lot of it came from fear. Now, I had mentioned Young Chang in the previous video, and she, her interpretation is different. So she actually, and her interpretation is very controversial. And there are a lot of people who say that she's not looking at the context of things, and despite her ability to actually translate the actual Chinese documents, that maybe her interpretation is wrong. Who knows, right? And I met her last year, you guys. Seriously, it was awesome. And Young Chang, that is. The Empress Cixi has been dead a long time. But Young Chang, I met the historian. It was amazing. Anywho, so Young Chang says that she actually supported this. However, it wasn't so much her, but that there were other people like the regents who had a lot of political power, who were afraid of being undermined, and therefore they halted it. And so here we go. We get to another slide with red questions. I know, this is what you live for. Truly, I know. So again, we've talked about some of these factors such as imperialism and poverty, and how do these connect with Fairbank's ideas about the causes of the Chinese Civil War, and then also how do these long-term causes of the Chinese Civil War connect with those of World War I. So one of the things that you were sometimes asked to do is to consider, to compare and contrast some two or more 20th century wars in some way. And so here we're getting started on some of the things that you're asked to do for paper 2 of the exam.